Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar Why Incident Response Should Be the Next Thing You Automate. I'm Khaled and I will be your host for the day. Our speaker for today's session, Harris Schwartz, Vice President Security Advisory Aon. The session will be in listen only mode and will last for about 40 to 50 minutes, out of which last 10 minutes will be for Q&A. Requesting all the participants to post your questions in the Q&A window. Also, do note that we have two criteria for certification. Participants need to attend the complete webinar. And the second one, fill in the survey and the right answer to 3 questions based on the webinar. Those questions will be sent to you post day of the webinar. Now about our speaker. Harry Schwartz is a vice president within the advisory services practice. He leads the cyber resilience service line within the cyber solutions practice. Cyber resilience service includes IR preparedness, security operation capabilities, crisis management, industrial resilience, CISO advisory, security culture, and insider threat program development. In addition, Harris provides virtual CISO and strategic advisory services, business development support, and enjoys building partnerships and collaborating across the firms. Prior to joining Aon, Harris was a leader in Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, security advisory services practice running executive risk and advisory globally, which also includes vCISO services to a wide range of companies and industry verticals. Harris is an experienced information security professional with over 30 years of private sector experience developing and implementing comprehensive security risk and investigations program. Harris has held senior leadership roles at Levi Strauss & Company, Safeway Abultan, and the Walt Disney Company. He also has extensive experience in building and developing global security programs, including cyber threat intelligence, data protection, privacy, and insider threat programs. Harris has an extensive experience advising executives at pharmaceutical and biotech companies with physical cybersecurity, insider threat program, and supply chain investigations. Harris's experience transcends cyber into physical security areas, including domestic terrorism, personal security vulnerability assessments, building security audits, insider threat mitigation programs, and general investigations. Without any further delay, I would now like to hand over the conference to you. Over to you, Harris.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, that was a great introduction. I guess it kind of dates me. I've been in the business for about 30 years or so, and mostly in cybersecurity. So actually, when this particular opportunity came up to do this webinar, I was like, yeah, this could be a fun webinar to plan. So thinking back over my long career, back to the 80s and 90s when I started in this business, if you think about cyber attacks, back then they were very different from the attacks that we see today. But thinking back as a practitioner, or in my roles, early on in my career, we had the responsibility to put together some standards and some processes for how we were going to handle incident response. And if I look back to when I started my career to where we are today, very different. I think back then there were a lot of those meetings with colleagues to collaborate and try and figure out how do we stop cyber attacks? How do we respond to cyber attacks? What are best practices? Because again, there wasn't a lot of good standards and good processes in place. Today, the majority of incident response processes are based on the NIST standard. So NIST, 800-61. That's sort of my go-to, and most practitioners go to in the industry for how to properly respond, to an incident, but not only respond, but also, the steps needed to be prepared for an incident. And that's a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is not only preparation, but also other processes and other steps and how they play into the idea of automating incident response. So as I mentioned, NIST started back in 2004. There's been some iterations of it through the years. But if we look back again, cyber attacks back then, if I remember, were mostly of the denial of service, so a DOS, or a distributed denial of service attack. That was largely the examples of attacks that we were seeing back then. As we all know, and if you're in the industry, certainly cyber attacks and the attackers behind those attacks have certainly taken shape. They're changing in size, they're changing in the sources and the resources that they use to conduct the attacks. The number of, if we call them attacker infrastructures, and even just the sheer number of different attack groups and different resources and infrastructures that are out there today definitely make cyber attacks more complex. And that means that your incident response teams certainly have to be a little bit more agile. They have to be nimble. They have to be ready and prepared. And I use the word prepared a lot. You'll probably hear it a bunch in this this webinar. And this is something that I tell clients probably almost on a daily basis about being prepared. So here we go. Let's see. Okay, why aren't you going? Sorry. Okay, there we go. So if we examine why has incident response changed? Well, for many reasons. The first one is, cyber risks and threats are constantly changing. As I mentioned before, we started off with the majority of attacks being denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks. They have morphed into the convenience, and I call it convenience, but they've morphed into ransomware. Ransomware is definitely the number one cyber attack of today, and it certainly has been over the last 10 plus years. Not so much 10 years ago, but slowly increasing in the number of ransomware attacks. And there's lots of statistics out there about ransomware and the amount of ransom that some companies have paid, and et cetera, et cetera. Number two, I would say vulnerabilities. The issue of vulnerabilities and the issue of attackers constantly exploiting vulnerabilities is certainly going to be with us for the remainder of time. So why has incident response changed in the way of vulnerabilities? Because there's the lack of patching by organizations. So sort of leaving areas of risk or threat for the attackers to find, right? The use of end of life, machines and operating systems that certainly should not be used or still in use today. Number three, what I call the lack of security fundamentals. Security monitoring, proper identity access, controls like multi-factor authentication, et cetera. Segmenting your network, especially if you've got a manufacturing environment coupled with your corporate environment. You certainly shouldn't have a flat network, right? Number four, the increase in the types of data that an organization has, we constantly find that organizations don't know what data exists in their environment. They have no asset inventory, which should include, a critical asset list. And assets are not just, hardware and software. Critical assets include your data. And so it's important to know what data you have in place, because again, this all plays into incident response. 5, the increased dependence on cloud infrastructure. Cloud infrastructure is certainly, or can be complex. And that leads me to number 6, which is complexity of environments. Certainly, if you have a variety of different network environments that you are responsible for, that's going to play a part with incident response. 7, the skill shortage. As probably everybody on this call knows, there is a shortage of qualified individuals that can fit into cybersecurity roles. And so many organizations, don't have the proper level of skilled employees. Maybe they're providing training and things of that nature. But number 8, this kind of goes to my preparation point before. There's no process or a lack of process, no plans, no incident response plans. The organization just doesn't know how to respond to an incident. And then 9, again, my point on preparation, there is no preparation in place. All of these issues and topics and subjects, they all contribute. They all contribute to the basic foundation of incident response, which is, being able to detect in a timely manner and being able to respond in a timely manner. And then even more important, being able to contain the incident. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And of course, as I always like to say, organizations do need to prepare themselves. There was a survey, actually there's a bunch of surveys out there, but I thought it was very interesting. There was a recent survey by SANS that talked about how 60% of the people surveyed, they don't even have an incident response plan or a process. And as we kind of go through the slides, you'll understand more why I'm bringing this up. So I know there's a lot of stuff on this particular slide. So for any business, any industry sector, again, it doesn't really matter what industry sector you're in or what type of business you're in. It's going to be very critical to be able to discover and respond in a timely manner. At the end of the day, the business has to continue, moving in the right direction. It has to keep producing whatever it's producing. It has to continue, conducting its business, et cetera. So I mentioned earlier about vulnerabilities, and again, this remains a large factor, in limiting the extent of an attack, but it's still, unfortunately, an issue for many organizations. So I think I have the term MTTD on the left, and then I have MTTR on the right-hand side. So, these two are very important. MTTD is really about, the mean time to detect. So detecting, all of the different security events that you might get on a daily basis. Certainly if you're in the, security operations side of the business, or even if you're in the incident response side of the business, being able to detect, an actual incident out of all of those security events that you might receive, that's going to be important. And then the mean time to respond on the other side, how fast you can respond to the incident, that's going to be important as well. Unfortunately, we've seen not so many, but too many, large scale breaches and attacks in the past that have certainly caused a lot of issues, especially for consumers. Ideally, if you can detect and if you can respond in less than 24 hours, that's the goal. Again, citing a SANS survey from 2019, 52% of the organizations, they were able to meet the MTTD of less than 24 hours, and 67% were able to meet the mean time to respond, which is pretty good. From an automation perspective, now I've been broached with the subject of, what parts of what parts of incident response, should we automate? It's always an interesting question for everyone. It's been an interesting question for myself over the years. If I look back to times, let's say when I was at Disney or even when I was at Levi Strauss, vendors would come to me and say, hey, you guys should automate. And I would say, yeah, I'm not interested because, I want to have more control. But certainly, again, as I noted in the past or previous about how complex, some of these attacks have become. And if you look at the bottom from a security event perspective, depending upon the size of your organization, you could be receiving from 10,000 to over 1 million events per day. And so how does someone handle that in a timely manner? So, since we're talking today about this, I certainly think that automation is key, in the incident response process, just from seeing some of the incidents that some of my clients and just hearing about other clients having to deal with. If we look at the target breach, I don't know if everyone remembers the target breach, but they were receiving hundreds of the same alerts when this particular breach happened. Those alerts were tagged as malware.binary. And so the issue was, how were the analysts supposed to know that these particular alerts were serious? They didn't. They had so many log sources, so much information, so many sources of places where alerts could be generated. Different log sources, everything that's kind of in that funnel are some of those examples, but they had no idea. The items that I have listed on the left are very common in today's environment, and so you couple that with all of the other, I don't know, I call them nuances, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to detect, you need to be able to respond, and then in the end, again, you need to be able to contain the incident in a very timely manner. Another fact on the Equifax breach, which was back in 2017, the report that was done up by the government said that it took them 76 days just to detect the incident, which I think is very interesting. All right, so let's get into the crux of this particular webinar. So the green boxes on the screen at the top of the slide, these are representative of the incident response process. Preparation being number one, and you've heard me talk about that. Detect and analysis is number two. Contain, eradicate, and recovery, and then post-incident. Post-incident is like conducting a root cause analysis, and then holding a lessons learned meeting with all of your different participants. So that's the process. If you are aware of NIST 800-61, then that's going to be very familiar to you. Again, I hate to touch on this again, but preparation is often forgotten. Having an incident response plan, you definitely need to have that. That's the most important part, and that's actually going to play a part if you automate your incident response process. It's actually going to be very important to have incident response plans, to have what we call playbooks, basically technical step-by-step guides on how to respond to different types of incidents. So you could have a playbook on ransomware, you could have one on phishing, you could have one on insider threat, etc. But this information is going to be used. It's still going to be used, when you're automating incident response. So, what are some of the automation benefits? Certainly, allowing organizations to react, detect, be quick, accurate, and critical in response. Certainly, quickly triaging a security event, right? So all of those different alerts that you receive, those are considered to be security events. Well, how do you, identify in a timely manner if that event is an incident and something that you need to be worried about? Or if you have multiple incidents at the same time. Automation, you still have the ability in most of the solutions that are out there for correlating your data and enriching the data, maybe with threat intelligence or other information. Again, preparation is still the key. You need to know what data exists in your environment, because again, you need to, if you have events popping up about, one particular asset in your environment, and you don't know that there's critical data there, then you might overlook that. This is where data mapping and data flows are important. And again, very important from an automation standpoint. What's critical in your environment, especially protected data. So data that would be protected by compliance or regulatory or even contractual. What evidence will I need, during an incident? What logs do I need? And then, the issue of log retention. How long do I have logs? The bottom workflow, the 6 boxes: alert, analyze, investigate, assess, contain, and respond. Sort of, familiar to the green boxes up to the contain, eradicate, and recovery box. And that's why I have the arrow there that says automation is possible across the first 3 green boxes. The 6 boxes is a typical workflow that you would find in most solutions that provide automated incident response. There's actually many cloud automation tools available today that follow this same incident response process workflow. And then many of the other tools and vendors that are out there, some of your SIM providers, offer this type of workflow as well. All right. So what else should incident response automation provide? It should be predictive in a way. You should have the ability to use continuous threat modeling. And you might say this sounds like a SIM. There are many SIM providers out there, as I mentioned, that offer this extra service for automating your your incident response process. What else? Your automation should reduce your cyber risk exposure. It should certainly limit false positives, as we've seen again with all the multiple of log sources and areas that events can be created. You're often going to get false positives or noise from your environment. Excuse my cracking voice. You want to be able to increase the identification of an incident. Again, from a preparation standpoint, usually in an incident response plan, you're going to have a list of, how you classify an incident. So what constitutes an incident in your environment? incident classifications are very different across the board. They're not the same in every organization. Obviously, ransomware would certainly be the same in most in most organizations. Hold on a second. I need to get some water. Okay. So I've listed, 1 through 7 based upon the boxes, up at the top, the preparation, detect and analysis, etc. These are some examples of how, or examples of incident response automation. Most of your incident response automation tools, you have to, again, upload and you have to integrate those standards or those processes. So all of your playbooks, if you have an incident response plan, if you have other processes, these all have to be uploaded into the tool. And these are the steps that, that will be followed when there is an incident. So again, you have to have the standards in place, and so from a consistency perspective, so anyone that was picking up a particular incident, they're going to follow the same process. Okay, let's see, what else do I want to cover? All right, let's go on. In our industry, I think, a lot of people mention people, process, and technology. I know when, our risk and compliance folks are conducting security risk assessments, they're looking at people, process, and technology. When my consultants are conducting what we call an incident response readiness assessment, they too are looking at people, process, and technology. And so people, process, and technology definitely plays a part, in your incident response process. Even if you're using automation, you still have to have a human as part of the process. That human is going to follow that process while that tool is walking through various steps. You still have to have a human involved. You still have to have qualified analysts in your security operations center. I know some of you probably use third parties, but again, you still have to have qualified people. The middle column shows processes, and all of them are actually possible through automation. Many years ago, I think when I was at Levi Strauss, we had an issue with the number of IOCs, so indicators of compromise, that we were receiving through a variety of different sources. There was so much threat intelligence, even some noise, even some repeating of information. But we needed to find a way to be able to automate some of that process. And so we had a variety of different ways that we captured IOCs, and then also what we would call indicators of attacks, IOAs. And plus we had vulnerability data, vulnerability scans, penetration tests, things of that nature. And so, we went out, we bought a threat intelligence, solution where we could bring in all of this data. We could bring in all of the feeds that we were members of, where, these IOCs and IOAs were being shared. We had APIs that were integrated into various devices, on our network and whatnot. Especially our perimeter devices, because the idea was, how could we automate the process of blocking these IOCs or IOAs at the perimeter, but in a very timely manner, because the typical process was you'd have to go through change management, you'd have to have people review the information, et cetera, et cetera. And so the process that we actually set up, and it actually worked out really well, with the API that we had integrated into our perimeter devices, we were able to execute auto blocks on all of our perimeter devices. So it reduced the amount of time that a human was necessary. Again, the human was involved because they'd still have to review it after the fact. But it worked out, pretty well for us. Again, as you can see, there are a variety of different things that you can do from an automation standpoint. Certainly around, when you're trying to contain a particular incident, if you've identified a certain endpoint, right? Some of the IR automation capabilities will allow you, in combination with the technology that you already have in place, to quarantine an endpoint, to suspend user access. Some companies will image hard drives that are on the network, because that is important, during incident response. Some have the ability to limit network access. So all of these things can be done, in an automation kind of way. It's just looking at the technology that you have in place, and then what makes sense, for your organization. That is pretty much what I have for my part. I guess we could take questions.
Hi, Harris. Thank you so much uh, for the session. It was really informative. Yes, we'll start with the Q&A, but before we start, I would just like to inform our participants about the certificate that's aligned with this product, with this webinar, which is ECih Council Certificate, ECIH. ECih Council Certified Incident Handler maps to Incident Handler or Incident Manager role. Anyone with ECIH certification is eligible for 10,000 plus jobs vacancies globally, with an average salary of $75,000 per annum. If you're interested to know more about this program, please take part in the poll that's going to be conducted now. So Harris, can we begin with the Q&A?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. So the first question is from Amol. He says, when do you not have in-house incident response team and dependent on third party, what are the basic steps any organization can take? What are the best preventive measures one can take before actual response to any incident?
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry, it broke up a little bit.
No worries. So Amol says, when you do not have an in-house incident response team and are dependent on the third party, what are the basic steps any organization can take? What are the best preventive measures one can take before actual response to any incident?
Yep, so that's a really good question, because we do find clients that are in the same situation where they do, they have third parties, and so it's still important for the organization to be prepared. It's still important for you to have an incident response plan. Most organizations should have a disaster recovery plan, and then also a business continuity plan. Even though you're using a third party, it's a good idea to, partner with them to identify, when there is an incident, what portion of that incident are they responsible for? You as the client, you still need to be conducting the incident response, so to speak. So you should have an incident commander, you should have a plan, because it's your business, right? The third party, yes, they are providing a service, but you still need to be prepared yourself.
Okay, so the next one is what are the differences between SOAR, SOAR, and SIEM? And also, can SOAR automate incident response?
Yeah, so SOAR is just a fancy term for it's security orchestration and something. It's a term that was used or is used along the lines of your security operations center. So the SOC or the Security Operations Center, they're the ones that are, doing the monitoring on a daily basis, whether that's in-house or through a third party. And SOAR is a way to automate that process. I believe, and I'm not completely positive, that there are, automation workflows through SOAR that can be used for incident response as well. SOAR was really designed originally for your SOC operations. A SIM is your event manager. So this is I'm not supposed to name names, so I can't really tell you examples of vendors. But this is essentially your security incident and event manager. It's a tool that's used in the environment. This is where you take in all of your logs, all of those threat intelligence feeds, things of that nature.
Okay, so the next question is by Ashwani, and he says, since automation needs a sample to analyze, how can a new threat get automated?
A new threat. Well, it's not really a threat that's being automated. It's the process that's being automated. So if you go back to my earlier comment about NIST 800-61, that's the incident response process. If you don't automate incident response, then you as an organization are essentially walking through those steps that are in that standard or in your incident response plan. When you automate, it's just automating that process for you.
Okay, another question regarding automation again. How do we prevent over-resilience on automation, ensuring that there is a balance between usual human intelligence and skills? I like the use of usual human intelligence here.
Well, again, right? I mean, humans are still, if I'm getting this question correct, you still have human interaction in the process. The automation piece is basically taking you through, if you remember let's see here. So this workflow, this is a typical workflow for if you were automating your incident response process. So the tool or whatever you're using for automation would run you through this workflow, just as if you were doing it manually and following an incident response plan. So again, a human is still part of that process. You still have analysts in your SOC. You still have incident response teams. All of that is still the same. This is just automating. I'm sorry? No, thought there was a question.
No. Okay. So another question is, how do we classify the incident by severity before responding?
Again, that comes from preparation. That is part of the incident response plan. So if you take a look at NIST 800-61, this will give you examples on how to classify incidents. This is going to be very important. A lot of times clients look to the consultant to give them the answer. It's not the consultant that can give the answer. It's the client, your company. You need to classify incidents based upon your organization or your business. Every business is different.
Okay, question by Manoj, very basic, but what is the full form of IOCs and IOAs?
Typically IP addresses.
Okay, okay. Now, if we automate our IR process, we are not to some extent making the automation vulnerable, as the automation process can also be hacked. Also, this requires good level of configuration training. Does this require a good level of configuration training?
I don't really understand the question.
Okay, I'll repeat again. If we automate the IR process, are we not to some extent making the automation vulnerable? Also, this requires a good level of, does this require a good level of configuration training for automation?
No. So again, right, you still have to prepare. You still have to have an incident response plan. If your tool goes down, I don't think the person understands the process here. So you still have to have a plan. If, let's say, your tool that you're using for automation fails, you need to be able to pick up your incident response plan and follow the process.
Right. Okay. This question is quite confusing, but false positive can be considered as true positive as it does not involve manual intervention. Could it impact production? I'm
Well,
not
of
sure
course it
about this
can.
question actually. Okay.
Of course it can. I mean, I mean if you so I don't know where this person works, but so I mean if you're in the space of analyzing incidents or events or alerts or things of that nature, you're certainly going to have false positives. Um, you know, every event that comes through should be investigated. Again, it's based upon your organization.
Right. Okay, the last question, how to adapt the new technology about the incidents response?
In what way?
Oh, that's just the question, I think. How to adapt the new technology about the incident response?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can't really answer that question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused. So that's it, Harris, from our side about the questions. Thank you so much for joining in. It's been a great presentation, and the questions coming in just says about how interested the participants were in this. Thank you so much for joining in. It was really informative.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a nice day. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This ends the session, guys. You can disconnect the lines.
All right.